Hi, good evening. Today's Friday, June 4th. We had an unemployment report today, and the payroll came in at 559,000, slightly below expectations of 674. But we even had some whisper numbers up to 1 million, so the payroll report definitely was disappointing. And what's interesting is that we still have roughly around 7.6 million jobs away from the levels before COVID hit. And at this rate, it's going to take over a year to get there. One of the other notable things in the report was that the demand for labor is rising and putting upward pressure on wages, but businesses just cannot fill the openings. Outside from the report, there is anecdotal evidence. Anywhere I go, on pretty much on every other window, there is a posting, help wanted. They are even advertising on TV now that there are positions opened at various places. And there is actually 91% of small businesses surveyed said that they cannot find applicants qualified in the past 3 months. This is the third highest since 1993. And a record high of 48% of small business owners in May reported unfilled job openings. This is the fourth consecutive record high for unfilled job openings. So it looks like small businesses cannot get anybody to work, and they will have to raise wages to compete, which of course will squeeze their margins. And the question is, can they survive? And I think many of them will not be able to. And so that's yet another benefit of how big companies like Amazon, for example, will benefit from killing yet more small businesses. So the whole pandemic thing and unemployment and whatever else the government has done to help is actually helping, again, large businesses and putting small businesses out of work.
It's amazing to see. I've not seen updated numbers. What I saw is a month or two old, but something like 40% of restaurants in New York City closed. And if for those not familiar with the city, it's very much driven by our people eat out much more often than they do in other parts of the country because people have small apartments, small refrigerators, and so on. And there are actually, even though it seems like the city's expensive, there are cheap little restaurants everywhere, and many of them family owned. And something like 40% of restaurants closed in the past year, and so that's a really big hit to kind of let's call it a lot of working class and middle class people that were running the restaurants. There was no way they could survive being a month or two closed, but then even trying to reopen, there's not the staff. So
I guess the market has interpreted the jobs report as bullish. If the numbers are bad, the Fed is not going to stop their easing anytime soon. So we had a really good day in the market today, and we're basically around 10 points away from all-time high. But like we were saying before, we've been trading in the same range for almost 7 days. And as Victor would like to point out, there was great deception when once we broke down from that range down below and traded at 41.65 level. And yet that was not the real breakout, but a fake breakout. And today, after the jobs report, we pretty much rallied straight up for the whole day and closed above that range. Right. So I would certainly expect that we would make new all-time highs Monday, maybe even in the pre-open Monday. But that certainly was an example of deception. And I think you could see on the chart that we're above the vol trigger level that is right now moved to what, 41.92 or so? Right.
And it opened right at that level. And then when the jobs report came out, it sort of, there was a lot, what it was is there were a lot of people positioned either way with either straddles or directional positions in the options market. And so it clearly it broke up, and so that at least we says that things will shift on Monday, but that there would be a tendency, a bias to grind higher here, but it all depends on it could be other external factors, of course.
Right. And of course, NASDAQ had a really good day. It was up 1.7% as the yields went down and bonds went up. It was, and NASDAQ also closed above its range that it's been stuck in for a few days as well. So far, it also looks rather bullish, but we'll see what Monday brings. And bonds, of course, were trading in a very tight range for almost 4 months. And after today's job report, we closed again at the top of the range. And also looks like bonds are about to break out from that range. Mm-hmm. And it seems like most of the positioning is short bonds. So it's been for a while. So perhaps that would spark some sort of rally in the bonds if the shorts are. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, there was some kind of conference where Powell and Lagarde were speaking, and they seemed to be at a slight disagreement where Lagarde was saying, ignoring climate change, it's a failing ECB mandate. So basically, she's saying that central banks should solve global warming, which surprisingly, Powell kind of disagreed with her. Fed is not seeking to be the policymaker for climate change, that is not their role, that they have a very specific mandate, and they can only indirectly educate the public and the policymakers on what the dangers of it are, and not try to fix the global warming. Because I'm not sure how and why Fed will be able to fight climate change.
Well, they could slow down the economy a bunch. They'd jack up interest rates and slow down the economy.
Well, that's one way to do it, yes.
I just remember, a lot of people that are, let's say, more concerned about climate change than the economy when COVID hit and there were the lockdowns, people saying, oh, well, look at the emissions have dropped by something like 20%. Yeah, but there's 25% unemployment right now. It's not, it's not achieving that a good way. But
right, exactly. And also, of course, AMC was in the news for the last couple of days again with wild trading. Mm. And I was predicting last time that AMC is going to break down and markets break up. It seems like I got lucky. And AMC actually went down about 40% since the high it made. Right. Not that there was an easy way to trade it, and I obviously didn't trade it because, like we discussed, shorting something like this is practically impossible with volatility so high and the options so expensive, and the borrow is too expensive, and who wants to be stopped out from that? But AMC has actually raised, unlike GME at the time when GME was doing this, they didn't do any raises initially. AMC has raised almost 600 million on Thursday through their stock sale effort. And it's their 7th in 9 months. So AMC has been raising about 2.2 billion since it began. So they have raised a lot of money. And some of those sales were kind of a little suspicious for me. So, for example, in one of the prospectus, it said that you could basically lose all your money on the sale. So be careful. And was that not the AMC CEO or CFO who was caught with pants down on Zoom call? There was something with one of the, I think it was AMC CEO who was caught literally with pants down on Zoom call. So it's a very interesting situation with AMC that's going on, but they're clearly unloading.
It is, but if because of these raises, they may actually have a balance sheet that it justifies a higher stock price than what it was when it was on the precipice of bankruptcy, right?
Right. So, but the price is still not justified even at these levels, 40% off.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. At the peak of the AMC prices, they were almost like larger than half of the companies in S&P 500, some absurd valuation.
Right, exactly. And exactly. And it some of these things, there was a at some point back here, there were far more shares shorted than there were outstanding, and so that set up that initial short squeeze back in January and February, right? Is because there were a very high number of naked shorts on this stock, and so there's been some really odd dynamics with this stock.
And what's interesting, I'd like to know where the SEC on all of this, because with the AMC CFO and blatantly pumping their own stock and selling it to the public at absurd valuations, it's obviously not sustainable. It's going to be the same thing. It doesn't matter how many diamonds hands the Reddit Wall Street bets have. This stock is not going to trade at $100 in perpetuity or even longer than a day if it ever gets back up there.
Right.
So
it's trading at a $23 billion valuation, $24 billion valuation right now. So
right. And how those tactics of giving free popcorn to shareholders, I mean, this is like Herbalife or something.
Yeah, there's got to be some sort of value after the squeeze to sustain this this valuation. Maybe one of the things that I've been watching is some of the momentum stocks, which we saw this collapse in momentum from starting in February, where it all peaked out. And I've been watching that. I see ARK Innovation ETF as being a leading index of that, but it's also interesting to follow some of the key names behind that they're invested in. Obviously. Coinbase is one, which it was off today, along with crypto being off. But then there are some others, like some of the satellite stocks, like Gilat, Atomera. It's a semiconductor company. So some of these were rallying really sharply. They peaked right along with ARK. And so, for example, this Atomera broke out today pretty nicely. Above its 200-day moving average, and it's still well off its high. It's still more than 50%, or more than 50% off its high back in February. So there could be some nice rallies in some of these. I'm not suggesting to jump in without doing more research, but there could be some pretty nice rallies in some of these momentum stocks if they catch. They seem to have caught a little bit more of some of the leadership of the market a little bit, and if that continues, then they could be some good trades.
Right, and also BBBY, another meme stock that rallied absurdly on Sunday, has also sold off around 30% in one day. So, yeah. I mean, if something is clearly wrong with the way the options are being used to manipulate that or something. I don't think this is normal price behavior for a company in the stock market, where the price goes up 50% one day, 30% down the next.
Well, it is. There is some options activity driving that, because, like, for example, when someone buys calls, then
right.
The market maker, depending on their inventory, they may have to buy the stock just to hedge, and so they would short the calls, but then they would have to buy the stock to hedge, and so so there could be some of these dynamics. That's not universally the case, but it definitely does happen if their inventory is really small, and so it's. One of the things I think that is, I mean, this is entirely the effect of social media driving some of these stocks. And in a way, I think maybe crypto is first in terms of being driven a lot by social media.
Well, actually, AMC, I'm not sure if you've seen that clip. They were girls dancing around the swimming pool with the letters saying AMC to the moon. So, how do you even react to something like this? It's clearly just a fun meme party, I guess.
Right. Well, it's kind of it's a different I think investing era, and it's a characteristic of this. I'm gonna say it's not like a new, like we reinvented investing or something like that, but it's like it's a totally different dimension that existed in earlier bull markets or bubbles or whatever you want to call it. It's a new dimension to that, and what's interesting. I mean, there are some, although markets are near all-time highs, and there are some of these crazy 1 day or 2 day rallies in stocks. There are still some good values in the market, and there are still some things to look at as good long-term investments. So it's not like the whole market's in a bubble.
Right.
Um, it's just this is definitely the influence of
Right.
social.
And just like the plane, when the GME was trading back a few months ago at super crazy valuations, there was a plane flying over Miami saying GME, buy GME. So that was the top. And so the same thing with the dancing girls the other day, that was the top for AMC. So
Right.
it seems like those things are a bit of an indicator.
Yep, they definitely are. And Elon Musk buying or tweeting on the Bitcoin and things like that. It's marked marked some tops pretty nicely. Same
Or
thing.
Elon Musk going on Saturday Night Live with Dogecoin. That so far was the top for Dogecoin.
It did.
Even though he keeps periodically trying to pump it, so far hasn't been able to get even close to those valuations.
And I'm actually I tend to be more skeptical of this just because it's a meme and there's not really development that's happening on this. And the people that created this, they haven't really done anything with it in years. They created it as a joke, and then they moved on to other things in their lives. And
Meanwhile, this is the most often coin that I hear people talk about, random people, is Dogecoin.
well, I would say though that this is clearly like where there's a um, disparity between people that have been in the crypto community for a while
Right.
and retail people who are getting in and getting involved. That it's like I think this is attractive to people that have no background in it because it's fun. I mean, it's fun and it's non-threatening. It's just some dog and a nice friendly dog. They've seen the memes and all this sort of thing, and they've heard it's going up, and Elon Musk likes it, and so on. So they think that Elon Musk is like this modern version of Warren Buffett or something, that everything he touches will make money for them. And so it's a little bit of that, but in the end, it's like, well, um, you go back to what actually there are value drivers of crypto, and in the end, it's things like some of the things that I like to look at are at a site called Glassnode, that there's fundamental data that tells you like the level of the market valuation compared to the transactions, and there you can get this tracked for you on a regular basis, so you can see it for Bitcoin, something like one would be like a market value to realized value, which is taken into account. So that's the yellow line here, and what that's saying is right now is that Bitcoin, yeah, it got to this sort of over, I don't say overvalued, but definitely a high level compared to where it's been over the last several years. Going back to, if we go back to like 2018, it was high even for some of these. Even the last, it got up to the level that it was at during the last bull market, but it's pulled way off of that, and now it's back at levels that it was at in 2018, 2019, which was a bear market. So it's pulled back to a much more attractive level. You can look at the same thing for Ethereum, and it never got quite to the level of 2018. but it's still way off its high, and it's at a more of an average level right now. And then another thing to look at, I think, is what's called the NUPL, or the net unrealized profit and loss, which tells you how much relatively is there are traders, because you can see when this is all on the blockchain. You can see when were the positions acquired and so on, and what is the average profit level. And so typically in bear markets, this has become most positions have become hugely unprofitable down here. Whereas in bull markets, it tends to become profitable. But we got to, this is Ethereum, I'll show Bitcoin in a minute, but we got to these kind of euphoric levels that we had last seen in early 2018. And now it's at a little bit more of a modest level. In 2018, we saw this collapse right off the high, but we haven't seen that. It's kind of just moderated a bit. And if we look at the same thing for Bitcoin, it's actually at a pretty neutral level right now. So is there something like this for Dogecoin? Well, I don't think it exists for Dogecoin, just because, to be honest, like 98% of the transactions are on exchanges, people buying to trade it. And there's not like, unlike Bitcoin or Ethereum, there aren't people just using it as a medium of exchange. So, well, unlike Ethereum, where there's all these different apps and so on, or Bitcoin, people use it as a way to exchange value, right? So it's so some of these things are telling me that we were kind of overbought a month or so ago, but now it's pulled back to a reasonable level. But something like Dogecoin, it's just something that people are trading. It's like the old joke of trading sardines, that they're not for eating, they're for trading. And so that's kind of, I agree, though, a lot of people, that's all they know about crypto. But if I can comment real quickly on these, that I think Bitcoin, everything pulled back, and I over the last few days, and my own assessment is that there's less a response to Elon Musk's tweet where he showed this like breakup meme, like he's breaking up with Bitcoin or something like that. And people interpreted that as bearishness, whereas I just think it was a corrective move to what we've had over the last week or so, where both Bitcoin and Ethereum, they had this deep correction, and then bounce, pull back, and then have got back up to that high, and it was just a corrective move off that high to test as we hit that recent high. And so we saw the same thing in Ethereum, where
before we move to Ethereum, there is a Bitcoin conference happening in Miami this weekend. It's called the largest Bitcoin event in history. And all the Bitcoin personalities are expected to attend. Of course, Michael Saylor, Jack Dorsey from Twitter, even the mayor of Miami, who was very actively involved in Bitcoin and buying Bitcoin and he's the one who wanted to invest some of the Miami, I guess, money into Bitcoin. So I'm not sure if he did that for the city or not, but he certainly has invested his personal stock in. So
well, the mayor's definitely tried to make Miami a place where crypto startups can flourish, and has created certain incentives for some of these businesses to locate there, to hire people there, and so on, and is regarded as very forward thinking in the crypto community for that reason. And but yeah, that conference is it's a huge conference, and the people that are attending it are not, maybe some people that are not just associated with Bitcoin, but others like Ethereum and so on. And but so it's an interesting conference this year because I think there's I've heard a lot less tribalism than I've heard in the past, where people sort of rah my favorite coin, and they're a little bit more they see Bitcoin as being the foundation of everything that's come after it, and really the starting point for all of this. And so, although there are other projects, it's Bitcoin is the one that made the case that this sort of thing could even exist and it could be successful. So it's a good conference. There could be some interesting things that are said over the next few days, over the weekend, that might cause a rally. I'm more thinking that we would bounce irregardless. But there could be some sort of news or some announcement that does something. I tend to think though that if you look at things like over the last week or so, people like Ray Dalio and Carl Icahn announcing that they had positions either in Ethereum in the case of Carl Icahn, Bitcoin in the case of Ray Dalio. I mean, these things are actually very positive news, and they didn't really. They might have pushed the market a little, but not as much as people think. It might have thought it would. If that announcement would have come out 3 years ago, it would have had a really different effect. But I think that both Bitcoin's a little bit more bearish right now than some of the others, where Bitcoin is sort of resting on this support. I think that the real test in the end is going to be this about like 41,000, 42,000 level on the 200-day moving average, which is right now at about 41,600. So 42,000 is kind of the key in the near term. And there are people that are maybe more bearish than me that are pointing out that like out in this range that there could be a death cross, so-called death cross, but I'm not sure that's where the 50-day moving average would cross under the 200. Okay. But I'm not sure that's really been all that predictive of Bitcoin. And one and two, going back to actually using.
If I know anything, Miami knows how to throw a party. So given that the largest Bitcoin conference is in Miami, I would be really, really surprised if Bitcoin price itself is not going to party this weekend.
Oh, I mean, this is up so much from last year at this time. I mean, it's more than tripled from last year at this time. And so how could you not be, if you're a longtime holder, why would you not be pleased if you bought at 55,000? It's a little downcast, but most of the people at this Bitcoin conference have been involved for years, for 5 or more years. But I think Bitcoin is really it's going to pull the whole market, all the rest of crypto too, if it can't manage to stay at this level or above or rally from here. But I think that things like death cross, they tend not to be as they're maybe overplayed, because if you actually look at data where it's studying commodities and securities, it's actually much less predictive than people think. And like maybe only 20% of the time or 30% of the time is it actually result in some sort of crash or something. But Ethereum's a little bit more bullish. Maybe it's in this sort of neutral zone, still 40% off its highs. So it's not like it's raising all-time highs right now, but nonetheless, it's maybe the chart looks a little better, but I think that part of the reason why it doesn't look better is because of where Bitcoin is right now. And if it were to rally back above this level, it would pull things back. But my own view, it could take a few months, a month or two for all that to happen. And this was a, my initial thought was that it could tap the 200-day, but it did more than tap it. It went right through it. And so that it just might take some time to work off this. But then what that means is, even though there are people that saying now that it's in a bear market, I don't think so. I think that it's everything I see, it's right now in a neutral place, and that once this overbought condition continues to be worked off, then it could be the basis for a nice rally.
Right. Another thing that today happened is that Jack Dorsey from Twitter, well, he also runs the Square, said that they're considering making a hardware wallet for Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And so that, I guess, could make Bitcoin used a lot more in transactions, if that's what their aim is. But he said that if we do it, we would build it entirely in the open, from software to hardware design, and in collaboration with the community. So the way I see it, he wants the community to build it for free so that then Square could use it and collect the fees, which is a good business move in my mind. So I was surprised that the Square stock was only up 1% and not more on this news, because news like this usually used to move the stock a lot more.
Yeah, so it seems to, it looks a lot like the Bitcoin chart, doesn't it? I mean, to some degree, it maybe not a severe swinger, but it's just like the Coinbase stock right now. That I mean, there were when it IPO'd, there were people. I think it was people like Jim Cramer or whatever saying, "Well, we'll buy up to 475 or something like that," and it's at less than half that level. So it's I just think it's maybe it's a little bit of a more bearish tone right now, but that's it's not a bad thing. I would say it's not a bad thing for that kind of disbelief, that bearish disbelief in good news to happen when it's still way off its low of last year, and it is up as high by a good 30%, 35%, but it's still well tripled from its level last year at this time. So it's not it's a setup for a positive move in the future if it can hold at this level.
I guess on a slightly unrelated point, our favorite doctor, Fauci, has been in a lot of hot water lately. And as his emails came out, and of course, Zero Hedge was supremely vindicated, as they were the ones who were banned from Twitter for saying that COVID could have been leaked from a lab in Wuhan. But now, a year and a half later, our brave mainstream media is finally catching on onto this news, yet again proving that Twitter and alternative news websites are usually right. And they have been right with various COVID treatments, like HCQ and others that were banned from Twitter, which turned out to be correct. So that doesn't really bode well for our mainstream media, which is now trying to do damage control and pretend they never said any of the things I said. But it looks like, at least to me, in some way, directly or indirectly, it's not really clear, is the government has funded, actually, US government has potentially funded the gain of function research in China. I mean, I'm kind of speechless when I hear this. It's like I almost myself don't want to believe it, but everything points to it. Gain of function is basically research, and you know more about it than I do, obviously, that tries to figure out how to make the virus stronger.
Well, it's basically, but I mean, you can, every time you see the word gain of function, you can replace it with bioweapon, because that's what why would you want it to become a more virulent virus, right? It's
right.
like we need to turn it into a weapon, right? Or
And
a
why would
threat.
you want to have this research of all places in China? In China, which has been our adversary uh, for a while, to say the least. So, and on top of this, we're paying for it. And Fauci has known about it all along, has blatantly denied it, possibly even lied under oath. And he still has his job, and he's still the highest paid government employee of all government employees. I think, if I recall correctly, and I'm not sure, he's paid more than the president of the United States. So, and he, via NHA, somehow funded this and denied this. And also in his emails, he was saying that masks don't work, while he was publicly telling everybody to wear masks. And so, given all of this, we're still supposed to be trusting the science, and it's just such a letdown of government policy and the science and trust that I'm not sure how the government could recover from this, because now the vast majority of people believe that it originated from a lab and leaked, whether by accident or not, we may never know, because China is never going to let us see that data. Even if it's still there, I'm sure they have destroyed it all by now, because why would they keep that?
Right. I think there was there's a lot of evidence that, well, the lab, so-called lab leak theory, is now gotten a lot more credibility behind it. But I think there's also a fair amount of evidence that there was a kind of propaganda campaign on the part of, let's say, the Chinese Communist Party. I don't want to say China, but to make this into something that we needed to fear and react to. And so the videos that came out of people like collapsing in the streets of Wuhan, like, when is anybody, I mean, we all know people that have gotten COVID, and some of whom have not recovered from it, but nonetheless, nobody like collapsed in the street like a sack of bricks, and they just got sick,
the same
right?
thing with lockdown policy. The lockdown policy has been very much pushed by China. All of those suggestions of lockdowns, they actually had lots of bots on Twitter and even in newspapers. They had paid articles everywhere promoting the lockdown, because their goal was to bring down the American economy, bring down Trump potentially, because he was too hard on them.
Right, and I think that there was it may not have been an attempt of China to like throw the whole world economy into depression, but rather it might have been just something as immediate as getting Trump out of office, making him look like he couldn't respond properly. I mean, who could respond to something like this coming out of the blue like that perfectly? But nonetheless, their goal was to get him out of office, because he was the one that was throwing up the tariffs and some of these other rattling the sabers a little bit and so on. And they just saw it as something we have to mitigate or eliminate.
Right. And how does our intelligence community now looks when Trump came out and say, I think there's evidence that it was leaked from the lab, and our intelligence community allegedly said, no, this is not true. And
yeah, it does. It definitely calls into question, like, where the sort of loyalties are. I mean, like, what's their agenda, or whose agenda is being served here? It's like, there may be like a kind of protective defense of some of these NGOs, like World Health Organization, where they had a very accommodative view toward China, because they wanted access. They wanted access to China's data and hospitals and things like that. They wanted to keep the China's door open. And they were afraid that if they came out and said anything that was, well, China's mismanaging this, or they created this in a lab and it got out because of the bad security procedures or something like that, then China would slam the door shut and turn into, become protective. And that's not unusual for China. They've done that many times in the past when they've been challenged on something like this on a world stage. So they didn't want, WHO didn't want to because after all, it's like 1.5 billion people in China, basically 20% of the world's population. So they didn't want to have the door closed to them in helping to manage global health or whatever.
Well, I don't know how they manage the global health, because now there is more and more data that they actually knew that there was human-to-human transmission pretty much at least a month before they have actually officially acknowledged it. And for the whole month, they denied it while they knew it was true. They also knew that there were cases of strange pneumonia as far back as in November or December, I don't remember, in China. And they also didn't let anybody know about that. So that begs the question, whose interest are they really protecting? And just in general, when you have this institution, they're not really accountable, unelected officials whose really loyalty lies only God knows where, because who knows whose side they're on. They're from a completely other country. They have no loyalty to America, Europe, or anybody. We just don't know.
It's difficult to really understand, like really know. I can't put my finger on like who they're really serving, but it doesn't appear to be like American people or people in Germany or that are counting on their government to tell them the truth and do the right thing and defend the health of people in those countries. And we're kind of in this post-truth age, right?
Right. It's relative. It doesn't matter how many studies and charts I could show to people that with 90% mask compliance, the virus cases keep going up, and with 30% mask compliance, the virus cases keep going down. Somehow masks still work. So the theories become impossible to falsify. If you believe something, you believe something. Data doesn't matter. We trust the science, but the chief scientist tells you one thing in the open and another thing behind the closed doors, but we're still supposed to trust the science. And global warming is another one of those things that we're supposed to trust them, but why?
Right. Well, it's they want to be what they want to be able to do, because they would exempt, say, China, India from these. They want to be able to redistribute wealth and assets from developed countries to developing countries. And that's been a long-term dream of some of these technocrats. And they would love to redistribute wealth and make the balance of.
How come they can't do it in their own San Francisco?
Or do it with their own bank account, right? I mean,
yeah,
they can
California, San Francisco,
all their money tomorrow, right?
Right. San Francisco is the dirtiest city, the largest amount of homeless population per capita, and the largest amount of billionaires per capita. So why don't you put your money where your mouth is, where you actually live, and redistribute the money right there? Build the free housing for those poor people who live homeless. Instead, they all move to Austin, Texas, and then they bring their homeless population with them.
Well, if there weren't, as the old saying goes, if there weren't double standards for this type of world-saving mentality, there would be no standards at all, right? And that it's like the I mean the people that some of the people that speak out the greatest, poverty in Africa or whatever, they'll even there will be these aid efforts, and they'll go directly to fund some warlord or some very corrupt government. And they know the money is, even though it's Catholic charity or whatever, they know the money is getting to these bad actors, but they do it anyway. Oh, well, we are the world and we have to do something about this, and we can't just not act. But they're actually feeding the problem. They're making it worse for ordinary people who haven't done anything wrong, right? And so that's kind of the problem. It's like that the good intention sometimes they have very bad consequences because they're just directed at the wrong place, and it's all in the name of doing some good without actually planning out, well who's it going to get to, and who's going to sign for it, and what are their obligations. I mean, you don't just give something away without any obligations, right? It's got to be used properly.
Right. Just
But
like Greta, who complains constantly about global warming, while she contributes to it probably a lot more than an ordinary person by constantly traveling back and forth, giving speeches, using her iPhones and Twitter. If you want to stop global warming, turn off the internet, live in the wild, turn off your AC, don't travel, and subside on berries in the forest or something.
well, and the thing that that I think that often the discussion about CO2 is a bit of a distraction, intentional distraction. That the by far the most potent greenhouse gases. I mean, if are CFCs, which they were banned in the United States in the late 70s. They were supposedly banned in China in the 90s, but they're still being produced there. And you can look at like the air quality, things like that, and detect it, that they're actually making whatever refrigerators with Freon or whatever these other CFCs. They're used in manufacturing processes, refrigerants, and so on. But these are something like 20,000 times as potent as carbon dioxide as greenhouse gases. And they were also the main culprit in things like ozone layer being depleted at the poles, which isn't a problem really anymore because most of the world, except for China and a few others, have gotten rid of this. But how could we say we're really doing something about global warming? We've already put all the scrubbers on the plant, coal plants here. We've clean coal. We're pushing everything where it's the carbon emissions are actually down in the United States from where they were something like 3 or 4 years ago. But
car emissions is not even the biggest contributor to CO2 anyway. If you take every piece of clothing, every napkin, every item in your home has been produced the same exact thing. It has to be transported to you. So it's not your own car that you drive. That's like the smallest of things. It's the plane that you fly for a weekend 10 times a year. It's the internet. It's the shirts you wear. Everything is basically based on consumption. So every consumption item is in totality, all of the consumptions is so much larger than the cars we drive that we're just really aiming at an end and not addressing the larger picture if it is even an issue, right?
Well, something like, okay, so say natural gas, which is largely, I mean, a very big portion of it is extracted through some kind of fracking process in the United States, right? And so things like the people that are against fracking, they're also against, they want to do something about global warming. But if you don't extract the natural gas, which is methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas. It'll leak out. It eventually will come out because of or it disperses as part of the oil drilling process or something like that. In other words, and there's methane that's in the ocean that comes up, and all of these things contribute. If indeed the man-made global warming is a problem, I mean these are things that if we're using the natural gas, which it's clean energy because it doesn't have residue or anything like that, then it's relatively clean energy. Then it's these types of things that we it's actually counter to the goal of reducing CO2 emissions and so on.
Right. Or nuclear power, same thing. Somehow they don't want to use that either. For some reason, only solar and wind is considered clean. And, killing birds is not an issue. Polluting deserts with solar planes everywhere is not an issue. Battery recycling is not an issue.
Or, I mean, the opposition to nuclear. I mean, Greenpeace was started as an anti-nuclear power organization, right? That was its founder. And they don't emphasize that anymore, but it's probably, although yes, you do have to find a place to bury the spent fuel rods, but it by far it's so much more efficient as a power source than anything else that's on the menu. and pretty much there's been no new nuclear plant in the United States for about 20 years. I actually think one came online more recently than that, but it's few and far between. It's very rare for one to come online. And
I
so
guess that's one of the cases where it seems scary. That's when we don't trust the science. We only trust the science selectively.
well, they're clearly though, it's not something that you could. If worst came to worst, you could burn coal in a burner in your basement or something like that. I'm not saying you should, but you could. Or heating oil is very commonly used in a lot of houses in the East Coast, and but something like nuclear, maybe at some point in the future we have many fission reactor or something like that, but that's not. It's not something that ordinary people could ever, in the current state, could manage. It's not something I could do to and properly dispose of things and so on. But so it's hard for people to relate to. They can't, as long as you don't have a tsunami. So if you have it in the Texas, high plains or something like that, 8,000 or whatever, 4,000 feet above sea level, then it might be a good place to put it rather than within a few miles of the shore. Well, but it's had an enormous impact because pretty much the whole nuclear power industry in countries like Germany totally shut down, and something like 25% of their power came from nuclear, and they just shut it down completely. So and what that's meant is that countries like Germany, they're now having to get gas from Russia or Ukraine, Nord Stream 2. I mean, would that have happened as quickly as it did had they kept their nuclear power industry? I don't know. But so it sort of is just a spillover effect of Fukushima.
Yep. All right. Well, we digressed slightly, but I'm looking forward to having fun observing what's happening in the Miami Bitcoin conference. I'm not going there, but I'm just saying, looking at the tweets, and I'm sure there will be lots of interesting tweets coming up. So, and lots of volatility over the weekend.
Thank you, everyone.